and welcome everyone. It's great to be back. I know it's been a little bit of a hot minute since we last spoke. We've all been busy. The semester's been beginning. As you all know, I'm Erica Gutzik-Gibbon. I hope you know because this is the channel that you're on. And I am here with Dr. Kevin Henke. He should be a familiar face to some of you guys. He was here recently. He gave a talk about the Castile Formation and a little bit about him. He is a former conservative Christian and young earth creationist. He is now an agnostic and has been studying young earth creationism and its claims for over 40 years. Dr. Henke received a Ph.D. in geology from the University of North Dakota in December 1997. He's retired now. Today we're going to be discussing the geology of the Green River Formation and how it's incompatible with young earth creationism and flood geology. There is going to be a Q&A at the end of this talk, which is about an hour and 15 minutes. Please keep the questions to the Green River Formation. And Dr. Henke will go over this in a little bit with ways to get in contact with him if you want to ask further questions, maybe outside of the topic. So, Dr. Henke, I'm going to boot it over to you, and you could get us started.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Erica, for inviting me back. It's good to be here. I should point out that I'm not going to be paying any attention to the scrolling on the right side of the screen. So, Erica, if there's some questions, again, related to the Green River Formation, you can ask me them towards the end of my talk. And so I have this PowerPoint presentation, and hopefully you will be able to see it here.
Oh, yeah, right here.
All right.
There it is.
Okay, does this look okay?
It sure does. Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, well, we'll start the slideshow here. And so I'm going to be talking about the Barbs and Barb cycles in Green River Formation and how they create fatal problems for young earth creationism and flood geology. This is my website down here, and you can go there and get my email address in case you have any questions or would like to contact me. My July 9th talk was again on the Castile Formation and a little bit about uniformitarianism. And I'll do a review of that here before proceeding on to the Green River Formation. Now, I should point out that the opinions expressed in this presentation are mine and do not necessarily represent Erica's views. And I have essays on the Green River Formation and the Castile Formation on my website. And so I'll be taking a lot of the information in this talk from my essay, and you can go there and view the references that I use and see more details. So you're certainly welcome to email me, but if you do email me about the content of my website or any statements that I've made during my talks, I reserve the right to post your emails on my website along with my comments and any rebuttals. So a number of people have contacted me about doing debates with young earth creationists, and I put up a web page on my website with non-negotiable conditions for any debate. I'm not really interested in an oral debate. I would prefer written debates as indicated by my web page. And this is because no young earth creationist has been able to adequately answer the following question for me. What advantages would I get out of an oral debate that I can't get from a written debate? Also, why should I share a public forum with an opponent when I can go on Erica's YouTube channel or other forums where I can have an hour or more to give my presentation uninterrupted? Now, too many young earth creationists, but certainly not all of them, are more interested in theatric entertainment and propaganda that totally avoids the difficult questions with Genesis 3 than taking the time and courage to produce a written debate where they must provide references and defend both their claims about science and the Bible. So also, why should I be part of the theatric circus where my opponents will refuse to defend their Bible and could use whatever I say for post-debate propaganda purposes, like what Ken Ham did with Bill Nye in their debate? Written debates, however, have all of the advantages. They have no time or page constraints. I expect all written debates to be thoroughly and appropriately referenced. In oral debates, my opponents can throw out laundry lists of claims that cannot be immediately verified for accuracy. This is called the Gish-Gallup. In written debates, I can take my time to check each claim. So if my opponent raises some issues I'm unfamiliar with, I can, go to the library for a few days and research things and then respond later. You can't do that in an oral debate. Now, recently, young Earth creationist Steph J. Hirama, and I'm probably not pronouncing his name correctly, gave a response to my July 9th talk on some young Earth creationist website. I was sent copies of his slides, and people emailed me from what they had seen of his presentation. I'm only interested in one young Earth creationist right. And these are the three main articles on magmatic model for salt deposits that Mr. Hirama has published. And his work has been thoroughly debunked. Reinford actually, in his ebook at Amazon.com, does a very balanced presentation. He explains Mr. Hirama's position and the positions of other young Earth creationists, and then he gives the other side. And the other side pretty well debunks the idea of magmatic salt deposits, explaining the Castile Formation. Now, William Jan Blom, and I'm probably not pronouncing his name correctly, but he is not a young Earth creationist, but he has an article in an upcoming probably November 2021 or March 2022 Journal of Creation, refuting igneous salt deposits. And he's one of the few non-young Earth creationists that has gotten an article published in the Journal of Creation. So that's a marvelous feat for him. Mr. Blom also saw Mr. Hirama's reply to my Castile Formation presentation on July 9th, and he published a rebuttal of what Mr. Hirama said. And it is in Dutch, but there's a press English button in the upper right-hand corner, which works really well in case you don't read Dutch. And then a few weeks ago, Mr. Wilford was on Erica's channel and gave a rebuttal to what Steph Hirama said. And he's published his rebuttal in a blog at his website. And so you can go use these references to see some of the problems with Mr. Hirama's igneous salt ideas. Now, Mr. Hirama's discussions are often unclear because he fails to properly distinguish between lavas and magmas, as well as extrusive and intrusive igneous rocks. He is clearly unfamiliar with the differences between intrusive and extrusive igneous rocks and melts. Otherwise, he would not use erroneous oxymorons like volcanic layer intrusion. Now, volcanic rocks are extrusions and not intrusions. Volcanic layer intrusion is like saying, my sponge is now entirely dry wet. It makes no sense. Now, if Hirama meant to describe a porphyry, he needed to use that term. So let's look at some basics of extrusive and intrusive igneous rocks. A granite is an example of an intrusive igneous rock. It forms from magmas. And magmas are melts that are deep within the subsurface of the earth. And because they're away from surface water and air, they cool very, very slowly. And this allows the atoms in the melt to arrange themselves into fairly large crystals to form the granite. Now, a rhyolite has the same chemistry as a granite, but you can see its physical properties are entirely different, especially the grain size. And rhyolites are extrusive or volcanic igneous rocks. They form from lavas or surface melts. And because they form on the surface, the melts cool very quickly. And so the atoms don't have time to arrange themselves into large minerals. And so they have very small minerals. And if there's virtually no arrangement of the atoms at all, it's quenched into volcanic glass. Now, there is an intermediate, excuse me, type of rock that's called a rhyolite porphyry. Here, a magma partially solidifies deep within the earth, and then it erupts onto the surface, becomes a lava, and finishes solidifying on the surface. So you end up with these intrusive grains scattered through an extrusive matrix. Okay, so using our sponge analogy, this would be like saying my sponge is now partially wet and partially dry. So this is not a volcanic layered intrusions. That's just nonsensical. Also, Mr. Herma showed several photographs, including this one of the Bushveld complex from South Africa. And this is just completely irrelevant. These are chromium ores. They're chromium oxide ores that formed from a mafic melt. By the way, they also could not form in 6,000 years, according to young Earth creationism. So this is also a problem. And this would be a topic for another day. But I think he chose this simply because it was layered and that the layering looked like the Castile Formation. But just because two rocks are layered doesn't mean that they have the same origin. So there's a number of other results about the Castile Formation that simply refute Mr. Herma's igneous and other young Earth creationist models. First of all, the stable isotope chemistry indicates a marine origin. It formed from seawater, the evaporation of seawater, with no more than a 15% precipitation to form the Castile Formation. Now, I should point out that my students successfully used stable isotopes in a class, in a geochemistry class that I taught several years ago. And what they did is I bought them a bottled water, a bottle from Fiji, one from Mexico, and one from some other area that I can't recall offhand. But they did hydrogen and oxygen isotope analyses on the water. And the hydrogen and oxygen isotopes will vary with latitude as well as elevation, because climate, temperature affects the stable isotope compositions. And so they found that that Fiji was located at the correct latitude for the water that came from there. But however, they analyzed the Mexican water, and the latitude was too far north for Mexico. It was not that far north, but a little ways too far north for Mexico. And then they looked at the label on the bottle of the water, and they found out that the Mexican water company had a bottling plant in Texas. And sure enough, that matched the latitude for Texas. There's also strontium isotopes of the Castile salts indicate a marine origin, and these strontium isotopes have the same chemistry as the associated limestones, which have marine fossils in them. There's no significant rare earth elements in the calcite, no high concentrations of lithium, boron, or beryllium that would be expected with hydrothermal and igneous salts. Also, how could abundant oil form above 200 degrees Celsius? Why did organic compounds form with the calcite in the Castile Formation, but not the gypsum or anhydrite? And the Kirkland scientific model explains this. But none of the young Earth creationist models, including Mr. Herma's model, it can explain this distribution of organic material. There's no evidence of salt diapirs or plutonic dikes and stocks in the Delaware basins. The salt diapirs especially are easily detected with gravity meters. And of course, the Delaware basin's been punched full of holes looking for petroleum. So we have a very good idea of what's underneath there. There's no volcanic glass or other extrusives in the Capitan Reef. The reef is not a caldera. Also, the reef was dead or nearly dead before the Castile Formation was deposited. The brines are not acidic enough, and any suspended gypsum and halite in the brines are not hard enough to erode the reef. You have to remember Mohs hardness scale. Groundwater flow was too high, and the reef was too porous for anhydrite to plug it. And last time on July 9th, I talked about this would be like having a pipe that's, let's say, 10 centimeters wide with water flowing out of it. And then you're going to try to plaster the end of the pipe shut with the water flowing out of it. It's not going to work. Okay, laboratory studies show that pyrite can easily form in reducing sediments. In contrast, contrary to Mr. Herema's claims, pyrite doesn't have to form under igneous conditions. Red beds are sandstones and mudstones. They are sedimentary. They are not igneous rocks. There's no evidence of contact metamorphism in the Castile Formation. Mr. Herema can't explain the 1800 to 3000 year and the precession Barbs cycles in the Castile Formation. Mr. Herema also has a melting incompatibility problem for anhydrite, halite, and calcite. The melting point of anhydrite at atmospheric pressure is 1460 degrees Celsius, which is much higher than the melting point of halite. Now, Herema and Van Hoyten, and I'm probably mispronouncing his name, argue that the melting point of the salt magma would lower through a mixture of anhydrite, halite, and other unidentified chemicals. However, halite is too rare in the Castile Formation to help them with this claim. Now, Herema also needs to identify what these unidentified chemicals are and provide suitable evidence of how they and halite could substantially reduce the melting temperature of anhydrite. Simply showing a eutectic diagram from Wikipedia is not good enough. So, laboratory analyses of the fluid inclusions indicate that the Castile salts formed at temperatures of only 25 to 45 degrees Celsius. Again, this is a sedimentary environment and not igneous, hydrothermal, or metamorphic. Also, decarbonization refers to the release of carbon dioxide by calcite from chemical reactions or high temperatures. Herema argues that the pressures during Noah's flood prevented calcite from decarbonizing in his salt magmas, but he never provides any measurements for those pressures or any references to back up his speculation. Decarbonization occurs in blue schists at very high pressures of 7 to 16 kilobars. Now, this is equivalent to depths of 28 to 64 kilobars. This is down in the mantle. And we've actually seen through geophysical methods tectonic plates moving down 100 kilometers easily into the earth. And so this is where the blue schists form. And again, the mineralogy is evaluated from laboratory studies tell us that these minerals in blue schists form at very high pressures. So young Earth creationists can't explain the 418,000 layers in the Castile Formation. Now, young Earth creationists often throw out Bertholdt's sorting mechanism, which we talked about last time. And Herema and Van Hoyten cite ionic liquids, quote unquote, without providing any chemical details or suitable references to back up their speculations. How could ionic liquids form 418,000 layers over a distance of 110 kilometers in no more than 75 seconds per layer? Why would this process, if it ever happened, not just form one large thick layer of anhydrite? Also, last time, a young Earth creationist recommended Schreiber et al. 2013 to me. Now, this is a study involving current ripples and other flow structures in calcite muds at speeds of about 15 to 50 centimeters per second. This is only 0.22 to 1.1 miles per hour. That's not very fast for Noah's flood. These structures are not seen in the Barbs of the Castile and Green River formations. They might very well occur in the near shore environments of the Green River Formation where the Barbs aren't present. The Barbs only occur in the deeper water in the Green River Formation. Now, flocculation refers to particles settling to the bottom of a lake, ocean, or sea. And rapid flocculation of calcite was known to form Barbs long before Schreiber et al. 2013. The calcite had to settle and deposit within a season to form a barb. Now, the trouble is that young Earth creationists too often cite Schreiber's and Bertholdt's articles without really understanding the papers and their limitations. These papers have applications in the geologic record, but not with Barbs. Okay, so this is a summary of the Castile Formation, responses by various young Earth creationist critics. And Jewish and Christian old Earth creationists and theistic evolutionists have certainly reconciled Genesis 1 through 11, with the 255-million-year-old Castile Formation. Advocates of intelligent design can certainly argue for an intelligent creator without referring to young Earth creationism. Now, secularists would argue that the young Earth creationists' enormous problems with the Castile Formation would completely disappear if they simply recognized that a talking snake and magic fruit trees are just myths, and that the formation is actually 255 million years old, as the geologic evidence overwhelmingly indicates. Okay, so again, if you've got other questions about the Castile Formation, you can email me. My email address is at my website. Now let's also review modern uniformitarianism, also called actualism, and it's also just naturalism. Now, modern uniformitarianism or actualism refers to both the methodology used by 21st century geologists to decipher the geologic record and the natural processes that produce that record. So modern uniformitarianism simply states the laws of chemistry and physics are constant over space and time. This is the same as naturalism that's used by chemists, physicists, biologists, and other scientists. So outdated Lyell uniformitarianism states that natural processes affecting the geologic record today are the same processes that affected the record in the past, and that overall the natural processes of erosion, deposition, volcanic eruptions, etc., are constant over time. Today, geologists no longer view geologic processes and conditions as necessarily constant over time. Decades ago, geologists abandoned Lyell uniformitarianism, but young Earth creationists still often attack this outdated form, and in doing so, they are using straw man fallacies. So again, modern uniformitarianism allows for local, regional, and even global natural catastrophes, such as the Chicxulub impact that killed off, or we think killed off, the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. But it also refers to slow and gradual processes, such as the Barbs in the Green River Formation and the salt deposits and their Barbs in the Castile Formation. The old saying of Lyell uniformitarianism, the present is the key to the past, is not necessarily true. This is only a general rule and not a commandment. Geologists use field, laboratory, and computer studies when modern natural analogs of ancient depositional environments are not available, such as with banded iron formations. And we talked a little bit about that last time. So I have essays on actualism on my website, and you can go there. And I also list many 21st century Geology 101 textbooks that properly define and describe modern uniformitarianism. And here's just 4 of them that people should refer to rather than using outdated Lyell uniformitarian arguments. So let's look at some definitions related to Barbs. A lamina is a sediment layer or sedimentary rock bed that is less than a centimeter thick. And the plural is laminae. A rhythmite is a group of sedimentary layers, usually laminae, whose composition is obviously part of a repetitive cycle. And you can see that over here. These are Green River Barbs from a photograph in Bradley, 1929. And you can see the repetition between light and dark. These rhythmites may be due to seasonal variations, such as with Barbs. They may be due to tides, frequent storms, or other cyclic processes. Now, Barbs are rhythmites, but not all rhythmites are Barbs. So a Barb consists of 2 or more sediment layers with distinct compositions that were all deposited within 1 year. Usually the layers are laminae. A couplet refers to 2 layers that were deposited in 1 year as part of a barb. Now, modern barbs not only form in temperate freshwater lakes, such as Minnesota, Scandinavia, Canada, but also in seas, such as the Black Sea, and in arid environments, such as the Dead Sea. Okay, so I am going to show this diagram here. Let me see if I can bring this down. All right.
Yeah, you should be able to pull it in. It should work. Fingers crossed.
All right. Can everybody see this? Can you
Yes.
see this? Okay. I showed this last time. These are two sediment cores from a couple of Swiss lakes. On the right is a lake, or is a core from Lake Zurich, showing Barbs. And here you have the dark material. This is organic material from the previous growing season, precipitating down during the winter months when the lake is frozen over or largely frozen over. And then the light colored layer would be sediment precipitated by algae growth, that is calcite precipitated by algae growth, and then also any sediment washed into or blown into the lake after the spring thaw. And so one dark and one light colored layer is a couplet, and this represents 1 year of deposition. Now over on the left, this is from Lake Wallensee, also in Switzerland, and these are storm rhythmites. And you can see that they're far fainter, they're more irregular, and so there's a strong contrast between Barbs and other types of rhythmites. Okay. Let's go back and see if we can continue here. Okay, does that look okay to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're back.
All right, we're back to the slideshow. Now
the tech is smooth today.
What?
I said the tech is going so smoothly today.
Yeah, I did some a little bit of work on my system and improved the situation.
Sweet.
So anyway, the composition of Barbs can vary greatly with climate, and we saw that with the Castile Formation, the erosion of local rocks and sediments, whether a body of water is fresh, brackish, or marine, and then also the size of the depositional basin. Now, Ord and Reed published this book back in 2009, and in this book, there's a chapter on do Barbs contradict biblical history. This is by Mr. Ord. And in his chapter, he talks about the Castile and Green River formations, and I will be responding to that. I've responded to this book extensively on my website. So anyway, Michael Ord is a retired meteorologist and not a geologist, and geology and uniformitarianism are not in his areas of expertise, and he has many misunderstandings about it. Now, despite young Earth creationist Dr. Reed having a Ph.D. in geology, there are numerous errors in Reed and Ord, and again, I extensively critique it here on my website. And then this is just a shot of what my Green River essay looks like on my website. So here's a Green River formation. You can see down here is for scale or people. So this is a really thick and large formation. And these are the scientific conclusions about the Green River Formation. It crops out in Wyoming, Colorado, and Utah. There are about 8 million Varv couplets. So in other words, 8 million years of deposition of the Barbs. Plus, there are other deposits in the formation as well. The formation formed in an ancient warm climate lakes. They're mostly humid climates with some dry periods. And the climates were mostly similar to modern Louisiana and Alabama. And this is in contrast to the arid climates that produced the Castile Formation. The Green River Formation is 45 to 53 million years old, or Eocene. The formation is divided into several members, and many members of the formation contain rhythmites. Some, but not all of the rhythmites are Barbs. So here's what the Green River lake system looked like 52 million years ago. You had three major lakes, the smallest one being Fossil Lake, Lake Goasut, and Lake Unita. And so we can look at the composition of the Green River Formation. It contains sandstones, mudstones, trona, which is sodium carbonate salts, limestones, and dolostones. And they formed in lakes that varied from freshwater to saline. In some areas, the lake levels retreated and produced mud cracks, root traces, and other evidence of subaerial exposure. And the Barbs formed in deep water and mainly consist of micrite, that's fine-grained carbonates, and organic materials. Okay, young Earth creationists don't want any varves to exist in the Green River Formation because 8 million years worth of varves threatens flood geology and their young 6,000 to 10,000 year old Earth. So Ord starts his article mentioning that Anderson and Dean in 1988 mentioned several references from 1975 to 1981 that questioned whether varves exist in the Green River Formation. Now, since then, the controversies over whether there are varves in the Green River Formation have totally subsided with new evidence, and now geologists recognize that there are at least some varves and varb cycles in the Green River Formation. And Fisher and Roberts argue that any alternative explanation to the presence of varves in the Green River Formation is difficult to defend. Now, the Green River Formation causes a lot of problems for young Earth creationists, and they have trouble fitting it into their biblical worldview. And so young Earth creationists are divided more or less evenly between a Noah's flood and a post-flood origin. Michael Ord and others argue that the Green River Formation formed during Noah's flood. Dr. John Whitmore and others argue no, that it formed after Noah's flood. So in a 2006 issue of the Journal of Creation, young Earth creationists have a debate over the origin of the Green River Formation. Michael Ord says that it had a flood origin, and then Dr. John Whitmore said no, it was post-flood. And Creation Ministries International actually publishes, or not publishes, they post PDFs of their articles from the old Journal of Creation. So you can actually go in and read these articles for yourself. They're very, very nice to do that. They do withhold the most recent year's worth of the Journal of Creation, so that those of us that have a subscription will have the privilege of reading the articles first. Anyway, Whitmore thinks that the Green River Formation took less than a few hundred years to fill the lake basins with sediments under a post-flood scenario. Ord argues that the formation formed very rapidly during the approximately year-long Noah's flood. Now, surprisingly, the presence of raindrop impression and animal tracks tells Ord that the Green River Formation was deposited early in the flood before all the animals outside of the ark were drowned. That would be sometime before the 150th day of the flood. Now, how is this stratigraphically possible? How did these Eocene lake deposits form on top of Mesozoic and Paleozoic rocks that Ord identifies as having an even earlier flood origin? Where were the Eocene turtles and mammals hiding as the dinosaurs now in the underlying rocks drowned? Now, Ord suggests that the animals survived early in the flood on floating vegetation mats and briefly exposed land. And so this is called Ord's beds argument, briefly exposed diluvial sediments. It's in his 2011 book. And here, this would represent the deposition of the Paleozoic sediments. You don't have any dinosaurs in them because they're floating or swimming or up on land that isn't quite drowned yet. And for some reason, the Eocene mammals and turtles managed to get on different vegetation rafts. I refute this argument on my website. Okay, so Ord criticizes Whitmore's post-flood arguments. Ord describes the thick sediments of the Green River and associated formations in their Rocky Mountain basins. How could these extremely thick sediments have formed in these basins if they are post-flood? The Green River Formation is on top of 5,000 meters of eroded rock and sediment, and the formation itself has been extensively eroded. Only the flood supposedly can do this, according to Ord. How did abundant oil form in the formation in only a few hundred years? Ord believes that the oil must have formed from the flood. How could massive amounts of carbonate form in the Green River Formation in only a few hundred years after the flood? How could large amounts of salt deposits form in the Green River Formation in only a few hundred years after the flood? There are trona salt deposits in parts of the formation. Where are the post-flood river connections between the different basins that can explain the presence of freshwater fish in the different basins? And then parts of the Green River Formation have mud cracks, and Ord argues that mud cracks are not necessarily from desiccation, but they can form underwater. Okay, and Whitmore then criticizes Ord's flood arguments. He says crossbeds and ripples in some parts of the Green River Formation indicate sediment flow into deeper water, which is consistent with lake basins and not a global flood moving sediments between basins. Sediment patterns are only consistent with lakes. Coarser sediments are near shore, finer sediments are in deeper water. Bird tracks, large stromatolites, bird nests, bioturbated sediments, and caddisfly mounds occur along the lake shorelines and disappear when the lakes became too saline. These fossils are freshwater and consistent with a lake or lacustrine environment. The stromatolites and caddisfly mounds are in situ. In other words, they're in their place of growth, and they did take time to grow. There are multiple horizons of stromatolites occur within the Green River Formation. They could not have formed during a chaotic and too brief Noah's flood. Ord admits that the fossilized caddisfly cases are indeed replies, but he still holds out a hope that they had some sort of a possible flood origin. Okay, some stromatolite horizons can be traced up to 70 kilometers in the Green River Basin. The stromatolites are biological, they're in situ, in other words, they're in growth. The Green River Formation stromatolites are similar to modern ones in Lake Tanganyika, Africa. The desiccation cracks and salt deposits are present in the Green River Formation, which are compatible with the drying up lake and not a chaotic Noah's flood. There are trona salts, these are sodium carbonate salts, cannot precipitate from seawater, but form from the evaporation of calcium and magnesium for freshwater. As expected, fish fossils are absent from the more saline sediments, and freshwater fish don't like saline water. And many fish species are unique to each basin. And how can fish sort by species into basins during Noah's flood? The biologists would also argue that Whitmore is saying that fish evolution really was really fast after the flood. The patterns of fish decay are different in the shallow and deeper lake water. This is not consistent with a chaotic flood. The fossil lake basin has abundant fish fossils, but the other basins containing the Green River Formation lack fossils. And this is an important statement, and we'll talk more about this later. If Noah's flood created the Green River Formation, the distribution of fish fossils between the basins should be similar. The differences in fish populations are consistent with the unique chemical and physical properties of each post-flood lake. Now, dolomite does not require higher temperatures to form, and in response to Mr. Ord's catastrophic views associated with Noah's flood, Whitmore states, young Earth creationist models arguing that the Green River sediments were catastrophically deposited as turbidites or other mass flow or some other mass flow process are easily rejected based on sedimentological and paleontological criteria. Okay. So Ord and a lot of other young Earth creationists like to cite Dr. Guy Bertholdt's laboratory studies, and I talked about this last time. Now, Dr. Guy Bertholdt conducted a number of laboratory studies that demonstrated that laminae can form quickly from silicate sand and other clastic sediment flowing in air or water. The process sorts hard silicate grains by size, shape, and density. These are physical processes, and this mechanism doesn't apply to chemical precipitates in barbs. And Ord concisely refutes Ord's claim that Whitmore concisely refutes Ord's claim that Dr. Bertholdt's sorting mechanism can explain the origins of the laminated organic layers and biochemical calcite precipitates in the Green River Formation. Dr. Whitmore says, yet Ord and others who have proposed mass flow sedimentation for the Green River Formation have failed to support their hypotheses with even a single example of a graded bed or how the finely laminated sediments could have been made by mass flow. Citing Bertholdt's work seems inappropriate because his experiments dealt with heterogeneous particles to produce laminae. The Green River Formation laminae are not thinly graded beds, as Bertholdt produced. They are composed of micrite, which are fine-grained limestones, and kerogen, which are organic layers. I am not aware of any experiments that have rapidly produced laminae with materials similar to those in the Green River Formation. Now, Ord ignores Whitmore's criticisms and continues to invalidly invoke Bertholdt's sorting mechanism to explain the Green River and Castile barbs. So the conclusions on the Ord and Whitmore debate. Ord and Whitmore effectively demolish each other's arguments. Young Earth creationism and flood geology simply can't explain the Green River Formation. Only the geologic interpretation that states that the Green River Formation is 45 to 53 million years old makes sense of all of the evidence. Ord admits that young Earth creationists have difficulty explaining the formation. Then he reminds us of his true motive: make any geological interpretation fit the demands of young Earth biblical interpretations. In other words, dogma over evidence. So Ord says the Green River Formation does have unique features that are difficult to explain in either a flood or post-flood model. However, the Green River Formation must first be put into biblical history with all the clues available before we attempt to explain how various rocks and fossils fit. So Ord is admitting that the Bible is a foundation of young Earth creationism and flood geology, and that they cannot be separated from the Bible. The Bible has to come first. And this is why the secularists argue that once people realize that the sole foundation of young Earth creationism is biblical mythology, then they have no reason to trust young Earth creationist science. And this cartoon from Answers in Genesis shows this very, very well. Here you have the young Earth creationists shooting at the positions of the humanists, and the positions are, the humanists are attacking the Bible and having some success at it. So let's look at the Green River Formation. In stratigraphy, the formations are divided into members. The Green River Formation is divided into several members within each of the basins in Wyoming, Utah, and Colorado. Here I show the members in red that have the barbs. And the Parachute Creek member might also have some barbs. So here we have the, for example, Fossil Basin, which contained ancient fossil lake. And there are 3 members in the Green River Formation within this basin. The Road Hollow is the oldest, and then you have the Fossil Butte, and the Angelo is the youngest. And so there are a number of barred cycles in the Green River Formation. You have, for example, the INSO or El Nino cycle of 4 to 6 years. You have the sunspot cycle. You have some cycles that we don't know what caused them. And then you have the Milankovic cycles, which are longer. Now, the Castile Formation has, as I mentioned, an 1800 to 3000 year cycle. But since it formed under marine conditions in a desert, how these cycles form is probably different than the possible 3000 year cycle in the Laney member of the Green River Formation. Also, the Castile Formation has the precession cycle visible. But as I talked about last time, there's only 209,000 varves in the Castile Formation. So that's not enough varves to see these longer Milankovic cycles. Also, the lengths of these cycles would slowly change over time, but not significantly in 50 million years. With this deals with how the Earth's orbit and so forth changes over time. So the varve cycles have been confirmed. They've been seen by numerous researchers since at least Bradley. They've been detected by different methods. You can visually count and measure the barbs for the smaller cycle, like the El Nino cycles. For the longer cycles, they've been seen in gamma ray logs and in computer analyses. The cycles affect climatic precipitation and temperature, which affects the compositions and the thicknesses of the barbs. Now, using statistical methods, Myers in 2008 concluded that there was less than a 0.07% chance that the barbs of the Wilkins Peak member were not affected by Milankovic cycles. In other words, the results in Myers indicates that Ord and other young Earth creationists have less than a 0.07% chance of being right. Although young Earth creationists will never accept these data, the barbs of the Green River Formation are extremely consistent with radiometric dates from associated volcanic ash layers in the formation, and Smith et al. 2010 discusses this. So here is the fossil butte member that's famous for its well-preserved fossils, but there are no barbs known to occur within this member, even though scientists have looked for them. And I'm going to show you here with a little show and tell. Okay, and I want to show this. Increase the screen for this here. My fossil.
Yes, yes, here, yes. Okay.
Okay. This is this is from the fossil butte member of the Green River Formation, and this was cut obviously from a limestone, and you can see it's 1.7 centimeters thick. So it's a much thicker than the barbs in the Green River Formation. This is not from the barbs of the Green River Formation, and it's rather pretty. I got that as a Christmas gift. And
that's a really, really cool.
Yeah, and again, you can
I like that.
Measure this here and see that's indeed 1.7 centimeters thick. Okay, so I'll go back to the presentation here if I can. All right. So,
all right, we got you back. You're good to go.
Okay, all right. And so anyway, you can see that this layer of the fossil butte member is just too thick for these Green River Formation barbs. These barbs are generally less than 1 millimeter thick. Well, it's really tiny. Okay, there's also evidence of subaerial exposure during the deposition of part of the Wilkins Peak member of the Green River Formation. You have mud cracks, again, this is due to dried surface muds, salt deposits, evaporites, solar evaporation of lake water. You have paleosols, fossil soils, root casts, insect burrows. And again, Whitmore would generally accept this evidence, but Ord can't. And so we have to ask, why do the members that formed in Lake Goasut and possibly Lake Unita have barbs, but not Fossil Lake? And it turns out that these lakes were deeper. And you can see here, Fossil Lake is the smallest of the three lakes and was more shallow. And so actually shallow and deep lake water are different types of depositional environments. So in shallow water, you certainly have sediments being deposited by climatic factors, but you also have that biological activity, bioturbation, tearing up layers. You have river deltas and landslides and underwater sediment flows and nearshore currents and waves producing their own rhythmites. You have desiccation, that is subaerial exposure, eroding away layers. So nearshore, you have silicate sediments and salts as well as carbonates, and barbs are unlikely because of the nearshore disruptions, and this is important. Okay, in deeper water, far from shore, the climatic factors are prominent, so barbs are possible. You have deep, anoxic, quiet water. The currents are low. There's no bioturbation, and conditions are toxic to life because it's low in oxygen, and it probably has poisonous hydrogen sulfide. The bottom is flat. There's no slopes for sediment flows. So you get primarily organic and calcite layers forming from settling, and you get quiet settling of the particles, and again, barbs are possible in deep water. And the late Glenn Morton in his web essay explains this further in this paragraph here. He said, out in the center of Lake Goasut, 100 miles from shore, the layers are uniform in thickness, but near shore and in small fossil lake, the storm layers are found. Out in the center of Lake Goasut, storm laminae are missing, as they should be. And so we'll talk about the Milankovic cycles, and I have problems pronouncing some of these words here, but there are 4 different Milankovic cycles. You have the eccentricity cycle, which actually has 2 different cycles, a 100,000-year cycle and a 400,000-year cycle, and you'd need an astrophysicist to explain them. But this is due to the interactions of Earth with the planets Jupiter and Venus. So over time, the Earth's orbit goes from almost a perfect circle to slightly elliptical. And of course, this is going to vary the amount of radiation hitting the Earth as the orbit changes. You also have the Obliquity Cycle. This is, you have the Earth's axis of rotation varying from 21.5 to 24.5 degrees from a perpendicular line drawn up from the Earth's orbital plane. And right now, the Earth's declination is 23.4 degrees, again, from a perpendicular to the plane of the Earth's orbit. And then you have the precession of the Earth, where right now the northern end of the Earth's axis of rotation is pointed towards the North Star Polaris, but in 13,000 years, it'll be pointed towards the star Vega. Okay. Now, these different Milankovic cycles interact with each other. And so solar insolation refers to the amount of solar radiation hitting an area of the Earth's surface. Now, the Earth takes 26,000 years, again, to complete one precession cycle with respect to its pole stars. However, the eccentricity cycles of the Earth's orbits interfere with the solar insolation cycle from precession, which ends up causing the precession cycle to only be 21,000 years within the geologic record. So it shortens the appearance of the precession cycle within the geologic record. And again, an astrophysicist would be able to explain all the details of that. So how could the Barbs and Barb cycles form during Noah's flood or in a few hundred years after the flood? Well, they can't. And both Ord and Whitmore know this. The amount of time for millions of Barbs to form greatly exceeds the demands of young Earth creationism, and there are no mechanisms during the flood or afterwards that could produce or counterfeit the high regularity of the Milankovic and other cycles. So how do Ord and Whitmore explain away the Barb cycles in the Green River Formation? Well, as far as I can tell, Whitmore ignores the Barb cycles. Ord makes unsubstantiated accusations of reinforcement syndrome against scientists that develop Barb chronologies. However, the results of the Barb cycles are the opposite of what would be expected if the scientists' research was being controlled by reinforcement syndrome. And reinforcement syndrome, excuse me here for a second. Need a glass of water here. Reinforcement syndrome is a form of circular reasoning or confirmation bias, where individuals inevitably find evidence to reinforce previously held beliefs, dismiss evidence that they don't like, and may be easily misled by false interpretations. So we have to ask, if reinforcement syndrome explains the Barb cycles in the Green River Formation, why did researchers fail to find cycles where they supposedly wanted to find them in the Fossil Butte and the other members? Also, if reinforcement syndrome explains the Barb cycles in the Green River Formation, why did researchers find the 30 to 33 year and other possible cycles that they did not expect to find and cannot explain? Okay, so again, the Barb cycles have been seen by numerous researchers since at least Bradley 1929 and have been detected with a number of different analytical methods. We also have to ask, who really has reinforcement syndrome? Now, no matter how good the evidence is, young Earth creationists will never accept any of the critical archaeological, historical, and biblical evidence in Finkelstein and Silberman, Drever, and other references that refute the Exodus and question the resurrection and other claims in the Bible. And I discussed these books last time. Some young Earth creationists even sign oaths to their employers or organizations promising not to accept any data that conflicts with their biblical interpretations. So the evidence is clear that young Earth creationists are the ones with reinforcement syndrome. Now, Bob Price goes even further and says that because the writers of the New Testament want to find prophetic verses for Jesus in the Old Testament, secularists argue that New Testament writers used reinforcement syndrome and went through the Old Testament until they found what they wanted. Now, an example of this, which is discussed by Price in his 2003 and 2017 books, is from the book of Matthew, chapter 2, verse 14 through 15. Here, the evil King Herod threatens to kill the baby Jesus. So Joseph arose and took the young child and his mother by night and departed into Egypt, and was there until the death of Herod, that it may be fulfilled, which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, out of Egypt I called my son. Okay, this is a reference to Hosea 11:1. Now, Hosea 11:1 through 2 identifies the nation of Israel as God's son, and then condemns Israel for committing adultery after being called out of Egypt in Exodus. So we can see here, verse 1 says, when Israel was a child, then I loved him and called my son out of Egypt. And then it goes on to denounce Israel for idolatry. Now, Hosea 11:1 through 2 have absolutely nothing to do with Jesus or any other righteous Messiah. It's condemning Israel. But Christian apologists like Saunders 2011 attempt to dismiss this citation problem by referring to Jesus as being typological recapitulation of Israel. In other words, he would expect, or she would expect, I guess, events in Jesus's life to line up with certain events in the history of Israel. But this is nonsense. When verse 2 is read with Hosea 11:1 in context, no Christian would dare refer to Jesus as an idolatrous son. Matthew blatantly quotes Hosea 11:1 and many other Old Testament verses out of context. And if this type of behavior was seen in the Book of Mormon or the Quran, conservative Christians would rightly condemn it. But they excuse it in the New Testament out of circular reasoning because they think it is the inerrant word of God. So this is reinforcement syndrome. Okay, so Ord uses another strategy to deny the existence of Barbs cycles in the Green River Formation. Ord refers to the INSO, Sunspot, and Milankovic cycles as being too weak to affect climates. He believes that these cycles should not be detectable in the Green River Formation. But he's wrong. Repepe state that the INSO cycle currently greatly affects climates in Western North America and Eastern Asia. And I remember the severe drought in 1999. And this Japanese article states that the 11-year solar cycle affects temperature and motion in the stratosphere. Barron and Buki concluded that sunspot cycles have affected the biological activity in the Gulf of California over the past 2,000 years. Young Earth creationist Faulkner, who has a Ph.D. in astronomy, also recognizes that there's a strong correlation between sunspot activity and terrestrial climates, including the lack of sunspots, the modern minimum, during the Little Ice Age of the 17th and 18th century. So Faulkner blatantly contradicts Ord here. Crowley et al., Olson and Kent, and Hilgen et al. Are just three examples with evidence of Milankovic cycles that can have profound effects on paleoclimates and the sedimentary record. And I have some quotations from these articles at my websites. Now, as a meteorologist and an expert on the atmosphere, Ord should have been familiar with these types of studies. So Ord is trying to create a tails I win, heads you lose fallacy, where if a Barb cycle is not found in a study, the cycle is dismissed as fiction. If the Barb cycle is found, it's still dismissed as fiction because the climatic cycles are supposedly too weak or because of other invalid excuses. So Ord and other young Earth creationists use additional arguments to try to deny the very existence of Barbs in the Green River Formation. And first of all, they try to argue that the fossils are too well preserved to have Barbs in them. And this argument is used by creationists Walker, Sephardi, and Snelling as well. But again, Glenn Morton points out that the fossils are almost entirely located in nearshore and small lake environments that do not contain Barbs and Barb cycles, and in particular in the fossil butte member. Okay, so Ord quotes a dissertation, or actually Whitmore's dissertation, and claims that fish would have rotted in only a few weeks, even if the bottom waters of the lake were cold and low in oxygen. Although Whitmore is a valuable study, he investigated fossil fish from, the fossil butte member, which again is not one of the members that is known to have slowly deposited Barb cycles or Barbs. Okay, Whitmore, furthermore, the results in Whitmore indicate that the rotting and disarticulation of fish may not always be as rapid as what Ord claims. And now Whitmore concludes, microbial mats may play an important role not only in protecting a fish carcass from disarticulation after it has reached the bottom, but in helping the fish to adhere or stick to the bottom so it does not float. Now, that is, microbial mats may explain how fish carcasses could remain well preserved during slow burial. And Anisto and Hallowell and Ord have some articles that demonstrate that microbial mats can preserve fish fossils without the need for rapid burial. And so microbial mats would have also contributed to the abundant organic materials in the Green River Formation. And this also explains why the Green River Formation is famous for its oil shales. And there are, however, a few fossils in the Laney member. And you can notice here a fish fossil in figure 3A of Fisher and Roberts, page 1148. And I want to, let's see, I'll show this diagram from Fisher and Roberts here. Can everybody see that okay? Is that clear?
Yes, we can see that.
Okay. So
sorry, I was
figure.
muted.
Yeah, no problem. Here's figure 3. So this is a cross section of a sediment core from the Laney member, and down here is a cross section of a fish fossil. Now, the resolution on this is not the best, but you can look down here and you can see that the fish fossil sinks down into the barbs a little ways, and there's not that many layers that were needed to bury this fish fossil. Maybe just, I don't know. It's hard to say, but it's not very many, maybe a few months or most a couple of years. So that's not a problem, at least with the Laney Formation. And so we'll go back here. Is my sound and everything okay so far?
Yeah, okay. It's going real smooth.
Okay, so another thing that came up is that must fish coprolites, so this is manure, be buried within 24 hours to be preserved in the geologic record. Now, the Green River Formation contains lots of fish coprolites, and young Earth creationists Sabardi and Whitmore cite young Earth creationist Woolley, 2001, which claims that fish coprolites or poop must be buried within 24 hours to be preserved. Okay, this is a pretty amazing claim. All right, let's see here. And so Woolley's conclusion about the rapid decomposition of fish coprolites is based on his own studies. He did some laboratory studies. From Woolley's paper, we don't know all the critical details of his laboratory methodology, including the dissolved oxygen content, chloride concentration, and other chemistry of the water in his experiments. Why were pH values of 6.5 and 8.9 selected for his studies? Now, these seem to be reasonable pH values considering that the lake was alkaline, but he doesn't justify these pH values. Okay, how was the pH of the waters adjusted, and how might these chemicals have affected the disintegration of the coprolites? What was the composition of the coprolites? That is, how much calcareous and other inorganic materials were in them. Why would Sephardi, a Ph.D. chemist, and young Earth creationist Whitmore, a Ph.D. geologist, accept any claims in this paper considering its poorly described methodology? Under the Anoxia lake bottom conditions, the claim about a mere 24-hour preservation of coprolites is unlikely to be true. That's especially true if the coprolites are full of calcareous material, depending upon what the fish ate. Okay, this is a warning to all of us. We all tend to accept results that we like without an appropriate level of skepticism. Okay, we have to avoid reinforcement syndrome. Now, while the existence of the Barbs in the Green River Formation is well documented by numerous researchers using different analytical methods, the statement about coprolite preservation is not. Also, we have to ask, who is Dan A. Woolley? Well, he was an 18-year-old student. Now, although 18-year-olds can perform good science, inevitably they need professional supervision, and the results and conclusions must be carefully examined. And I say that as an 18-year-old student, many years ago. There's no co-author on the paper. Woolley appears to acknowledge a number of relatives that helped him to write the paper on page 110. Are any of them scientists? Well, we don't know. If he had any professional supervisor, why wasn't his or her name listed as a co-author along with their credentials? Now, Willie's work needs to be duplicated under strict and well-described laboratory conditions before anyone can argue that fish coprolites must be buried within 24 hours to be preserved in the geologic record. So also the efforts of Ord to attack the existence of Barbs and Barb cycles in the Green River Formation involves omitting critical details when quoting studies of non-barbed laminae outside of the Tipton, Laney, and Wilcombe Peak member to create the false impression that there are no barbs anywhere in the formation. And a good example of an article that has been frequently misused is Bukim and Biaggi, 1988. And this has been misquoted by Snelling, Ord, Sephardi, and Garner. And what you have are volcanic ash layers. Now, volcanic ash layers are rapidly deposited. And Bukim and Biaggi measured the number of couplets between two volcanic ash layers. In an ancient nearshore environment, they found 1,568 couplets. Then they went 15 kilometers away towards the ancient basin center, and they found only 1,160 couplets. So these are rhythmites. They're not barbs. And however, the young earth creationists here, when they cite Bukim and Biaggi, they never identify the member and whether it's known to contain barbs or not. It turns out this study was done in the fossil butte member, which again is not known to contain barbs. And again, Bukim and Biaggi looked at the fossil butte member looking for barbs. You know, there might be some barbs there, but never found any. And Glenn Morton, again, condemns young earth creationist Gardner, 1997, for again misquoting Bukim and Biaggi. And Morton says, Gardner makes it look as if secular geologists are coming to the conclusion that there are no barbs in the Green River. This is not the case at all. Furthermore, Gardner fails to honestly inform his readers that Bukim's work is in Fossil Lake, the smallest of the ancient lakes, and this is an important aspect of what the researchers observed. It is true that they observed more laminations near shore than out in the lake's center, but they should have, and this is what Gardner fails to tell his readers. And again, Ord and Klevberg are aware of Morton's website, but yet they continue to ignore his repeated warnings about paying attention to depositional environments and differences between the members of the Green River Formation. And Snelling also commits the same errors. So Church and Bukim did another study where they found disparity in the laminae counts between the ash layers. Now, Ord mentions that Church and Bukim did their study in the Fossil Lake Basin, and that's good for him, but it's not good enough because Ord fails to tell his readers that this study was in the Fossil Butte member and why it was not surprising when no barbs were found. Now, like Lynn Morton, Church and Bukim stated that the barbs are not expected in small lakes, and like the one that produced the Fossil Butte member, they state it is important that investigators establish the laminae are barbs when trying to imply climatically induced depositional cycles. This is especially true in small lakes where the inflow processes may be the controlling factor basin-wide. Okay, while Ord and other young earth creationists want to abolish all barbs from the Green River Formation, Ord also neglects to mention that Church and Bukim never advocate such an extreme position. The laminae, this is what Church and Bukim say, the laminations of the Eocene Green River Formation in Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming are generally accepted as barbs, which is true. However, there is evidence that at least some of the laminations from the middle unit of the Fossil Butte member in southwest Wyoming were not deposited as annual couplets. And again, others have seen the same thing in the Fossil Butte. So when reviewing the literature on the Green River Formation, no matter if the authors are secular, old earth creationists, young earth creationists, or whoever they are, it's absolutely essential to note which members were sampled in the studies. Not all members have barbs. Okay, so then Ord misquotes Crowley et al. 1986. And Ord stresses the lack of barbs that was found in the Crowley et al. 1986 study. And this study was occurred in the Parachute Creek member, which may or may not contain Barbs cycles. Ord ignores critical comments by Reed Pepe in 1991. The Parachute Creek member contains oolitic carbonates, salt pans, and nearshore deposits. And Reed Pepe suggests that the Crowley et al. Samples were collected too close to the ancient shoreline where any Barb cycles would have been disrupted by erosion, drying, rainstorms, and dust deposits. And Glenn Morton goes along with this. So Ord then gives some warnings about limestone marl alterations. Ord cites Knoll 2019 and Westfall 2010, and warns that diagenesis, that is subsurface lithification, may produce laminations with false Milankovic cycles. Now Noel discusses limestone barbs from a variety of marine environments, but they do not apply to the non-marine sedimentary rocks like the Green River Formation. And Westfall also emphasizes a marine limestone marls. A marl is a calcite silicate clay, a sedimentary rock. So these rocks were marine and not like the Green River barbs. Okay, another suggestion by Ord. He suggests that ocean waves during the flood may have produced the Green River barbs. In other words, you have these giant waves sweeping in from the Atlantic or Pacific over all of North America, producing the Green River Formation. But how would these flood waves duplicate, again, the ENSO, sunspots, and Milankovic cycles? They can't. Young Earth creationists have no rational flood mechanisms to explain the diverse and regular bar cycles in the Green River Formation. They only have groundless speculation. Now, Ord goes on to try to argue that there's a presence of marine organisms in the Green River Formation. He thinks that the flood mixed together marine and non-marine organisms together in the formation. And fossil herring and rays have been found in the Green River Formation. Now, Ord's ally, Tim Clary, also a young Earth creationist, states that modern herring and rays are only found in marine environments. After seeing a display on the Green River Formation in a museum, Clary states the following: why are these fossil fish, which look nearly identical to modern herring and rays that live exclusively in the marine realm today, claim to be ancient freshwater fish in this museum? Uniformitarian scientists make this claim because these fish were found in the Green River Formation of Wyoming, and this rock unit also contains a lot of fish like gar, paddlefish, and samfish that are only found in fresh water. Therefore, they have to conclude that the entire rock unit represented an ancient freshwater lake deposit. So do ancient or do modern herring and rays live exclusively in the marine realm today, as Clarley claims? The answer is no. Modern freshwater rays are found in Southeast Asia, Australia, and Africa, and freshwater herring occur in the Great Lakes and in rivers. So there's no need to invoke tsunamis from Noah's flood to explain the presence of herring and ray fossils in the Green River Formation. There's no evidence of marine fossils in the Green River Formation. The fossils definitively indicate that it was a non-marine lake depositional environment, just as young Earth creationist Whitmore claims. So, also, Snelling cites Fisher and Roberts, 1991, and mentions the presence of isolated pebbles in the Green River Formation that could only have been deposited by fast-moving currents. However, Snelling fails to provide a page or figure number for these pebbles. Now, if you look at Fisher and Roberts, do a scan of the word pebble or pebbles, it's never mentioned in the paper. Fisher and Roberts never mention pebbles anywhere in the paper. Now, there is a large oval object that appears at the top of figure 5A in Fisher and Roberts on page 1150. And I'll show that because that's probably what Ord is referring to, or not Ord, excuse me, Snelling is referring to. And let's see here. I'll bring that up. Okay, can you see this all right?
Sure can.
Okay, we'll go down to figure 5. And there's this large round object and it's sunk actually quite a bit into the Barbs, where you don't know how many barbs it took to bury it. But this might be the pebble that Snelling is referring to. There's nothing else in this article that comes close to describing a pebble. But if you look at the caption of the paper, it says this is a carbonate coprolite. So this isn't a pebble. This is a drop of fish poop. And again, you have to look at it. This is calcite rich. And so this is not going to decay within 24 hours when it's largely calcite. So there got to be more studies on that before the creationists can claim that coprolites can deposit within 24 hours. And so anyway, I'll finish up here. Fisher Roberts summarized this situation with the Green River Barbs. The extreme regularity of this lamination, having formed millions of couplets in the course of Green River time, is indeed hard to attribute to any oscillatory mechanism other than that of the annual cycle. And the product shows good similarity to varying in modern lakes. In other words, the Green River Formation has barbs, and there's no other way of explaining it. And so here are my references, and if there's any questions on the Green River Formation, I'll try to answer them. If you got questions about other things, you're certainly free to email me, and I'll try to answer them. I'll just go through the references here. I made a mistake last time in not showing my references, although most of them are on my website.
That was superb. I really appreciated the summarization of the Ord-Whitmore conflict.
Yeah, that's quite a problem for them. Now, Ord gives the misconception that, the Green River Formation is obviously a flood deposit. But yet there's a large number of young Earth creationists that disagree with that view. And
it feels very analogous to the where is the flood boundary issue that seems to pop up. And the fact that that is a difficult, here, I'll quit this sharing here. The fact that that can't be parsed should be very telling. I mean, if this is the largest geologic catastrophe of all time, it should stick out like a sore thumb where that boundary is. We do have a few questions, if you would be willing.
Sure, no problem.
We'll do Jonathan's first. You already heard it beforehand when we were discussing. And for those of you, obviously, who didn't hear because it was in the pre-show, Jonathan, he's another geology friend of ours. He asks, if we didn't have any geochronological tools, that is based off the sedimentology alone, could we still put reasonable constraints on the time needed for the Green River Formation to be deposited? What are the best indications for that, and what would be a plausible minimum for that estimate?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, it's the radiometric dating of the volcanic ashes that give the 45 to the 53 million year old dates. And there's a number of ashes there. And there are places where the bars count up and are consistent with the radiometric dates. And Smith et al. 2010 talk about this.
That's so wild. One of my favorite things about geology is that intersection between the standard geological methods intertwining with the physics of radiometric or absolute dating. So counting up through sedimentology stuff and combining that with the radiometric stuff. It's pretty cool. It's like we've mentioned it before, but the spreading of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge combined with radiometric dating that's a killer.
Robert, that is an interesting thing, because right now, if you measure how quickly the Atlantic, the spreading that is occurring on the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, you measure it with satellites, it's something like 2 centimeters per year.
Right.
And if you take the distance from the Mid-Atlantic Ridge to the North American continent or South American continent and divide it by 2 centimeters per year, you get about 190 million years. And that's exactly what the radiometric dates show. So that refutes Baumgartner's fast-moving radiometric dates, because then he has to explain why the radiometric dates correlate with the modern spreading rate for the plates. Of course, that's a Lyell uniformitarian assumption, but still, it's close.
Oh, well, the flood was just very well coordinated to give just the appearance of very ancient age, of course. A question from Robert Caslow. He specifically wants to, he came a little bit late, wants to know how long it took for the Green River Formation to form.
Well, at least 8 million years. Now, there are sediments probably outside of the Barbs, so it might be a little bit longer than that.
Right.
You could look through the Smith et al. 2010 article, and it'll give you some more specific dates.
Right.
So it's from 45 to 53 million years at least.
Yeah, total. Gotcha. Ugly German Truths wants to know if Fossil Butte has the most fish fossils, was it also the least saline of all three basins?
Yeah, probably, yes.
Okay, and Silver Harlow is making a joke. He says, but were you actually there? Checkmate, atheists.
Well, I'll use forensic data, and that reminds me of something that Johnny Cochran would have said in the OJ trial. The prosecution wasn't there. How do they know that DNA is real? And or like the hundreds of people that have been released in Illinois through DNA analyses showing that they're innocent. The Innocence Foundation, well, they weren't there either, but the DNA shows that they were not guilty of their crimes.
If the Barbs don't fit, you must acquit.
Yeah, that's funny. The Barbs don't fit, you must acquit. I'll have to remember that. That's really good.
So this is a question from me. I was just curious. I have two questions actually, because I was really interested when you showed that chart discussing how some of these Barb cycles, the cause is unknown. Do we have any, what's the literature saying on that right now, on the potentials for some of these cycles that don't have an easy pin, if you know what I mean?
I don't know. The people that have proposed them don't know. I think they're still unsolved. And, even back in 1929, when, Bradley started seeing cycles, I don't think the El Nino was known at that time. The sunspot cycle was. So, as we keep looking, the 30 to 33 year cycle might be verified. We might find out what it is. Now, the 600 and 3,000 year cycle, that's questionable in the Laney, and they might show that later on that was a mistake, and we don't know.
Yeah. Mr. Wilford asks from the chat, is there evidence of rivers flowing into the basins? Did Whitmore respond to Ord with any, such as delta deposits on the rims of the basins?
I can't remember that he did. Again, you can access both Whitmore's and Ord's PBS from Creation Ministries International and read in detail. So offhand, I don't know. But even so, I mean, the idea of a fish evolving quickly in different basins in a few hundred years, I guess that's possible. But that's really fast for a creationist.
One of the things too that really tends to get me with this idea that some of these lakes are being formed by the flood, and we know the outlook geologically of a lot of these places, is it not true that we tend to find different types of plankton, microfossils in a lot of these locations, and like microfossils, planktonic microfossils, I know this for a fact, you can differentiate fairly easily whether or not these things are marine or not. So it should be that simple. If there's mixing going on, we should be finding a mix of marine and freshwater plankton microfossils everywhere. This should be ubiquitous, but that's not what we find.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on plankton or algae, so I can't comment on that. But that would be a good thing to look for. That the scientists and also if Whitmore, for example, wanted to look at that would be a good thing to look for. But I think that Whitmore's made a very, very strong case. And other scientists have, this is a non-marine lake environment, it's lacustrine, and it's not marine. Now, Ord tries to argue, the waters of the flood were probably not that's saline. But again, there's no evidence for that. It's just speculation. And again, with the Castile Formation, we know that was marine. That was from seawater with a little bit of precipitation in it. So
yeah, there's just diagnostic characteristics for this stuff is the thing.
And the stable isotope chemistry and so forth. Yes. That indicates.
Mr. Wilford notes, he says, I know the answer, I just wanted it on record. And then he says that he checked, he did identify delta deposits.
Oh, he did. Yeah, I think that both Ord and Reed, or not Ord, Ord and Whitmore, talk about delta deposits. Again, Ord would say, well, those are from Noah's flood.
Right.
And,
right.
And Whitmore would say it's from post-flood.
Right.
But yeah. I don't know exactly how those delta deposits were oriented with respect to the basins.
Right.
But it could very well be that they were connected. Again, that has no problem for the uniformitarian interpretation.
Right. One other question that I had too for you is, because you were discussing this deep Anoxia in lakes, and I know that Anoxia in lakes is very key for like taphonomically speaking for preservation of different kinds of organisms that fossilize in lakes, eutrophic lakes usually. But I wanted to ask, because it seemed like you'd looked into this a little bit, how common is deep anoxia in lakes in general? Like, do all lakes, do they tend to be pretty anoxic at the bottom, or do they have to be eutrophic?
Well, they can be if they're deep. Now, certainly the Black Sea has lots of anoxic conditions in it. And I don't know offhand, I would guess that Lake Superior has some as well.
So it's a depth thing.
It's water depth, yeah. And you get, stratification of the water, and where oxygen simply cannot reach the bottom, at least not all the time. And we talked about that with the Castile Formation and how periodically, once every 1,800 or 3,000 years, the water overturns and you get oxygen going down into the deeper water.
Right. Okay, cool. I think that's all our questions. As with last time, I found myself doing this again, where I would get a question and the next slide would cover it. So, I mean, it's always a good sign when we don't have too many questions, particularly since we've had 70, 80 people in here pretty consistently. So you've obviously done a great job explaining it.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Erica, for inviting me. I'll stick around a little bit to look at the comments, but if people really have questions or comments, they should email me. I don't, usually go to YouTube and look at things. And again, if there are, if Young Earth creationists have a rebuttal, they need to put it in writing and send it to me. And don't put it on a video, because I won't watch it. I won't probably even know about it. And
they would never be so bold, Kevin.
Well, who knows?
We can cross our fingers. I would love to be proven wrong on this. I would absolutely love that. But I don't imagine we will get that. I imagine we'll get a very passive-aggressive video response from some of the more irrelevant YouTube channels on the subject.
Yeah, I would expect that maybe Michael Ord or John Whitmore might respond. And again, I would ask, if they want to respond, send me an email. Send me something in writing. I don't want to watch a video. I'm far too busy for that. With writing, I can skim things and look at it here. Go off, and I'm far better at reading something. And with my hearing going, I do have problems pronouncing words, if you notice, and also with hearing stuff. Well, I had problems with the Obliquity Cycle and stuff like that. But anyway, that's a hearing defect of mine.
I will put your sources again in the description, your website, etc., stuff like that, so folks can check that website out to get your contact information. And that way, if they really have further questions on the subject, they can reach out to you and ask.
Yeah, and I would ask that they maybe watch this video or read my essays before sending an email, because some of the questions have probably already been answered.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. Let me double
anyway.
The side chat. We have one person, Creation Myths, friend of the channel, Dr. Dan, says, please pass on my thanks for making this understanding to a biologist with very little geology knowledge. Thank you very much. So,
well, thank you all so very, very, very much. You're all very kind.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Well, with that, we will go ahead and end the broadcast. I'm sure we haven't seen the last here of Dr. Kevin Henke. Hopefully we can get him back on to talk about something else. I know there's
Yeah.
plenty to discuss. So until next time, everybody, please take care. Please stay safe. Get vaccinated, all that stuff. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Thank you all.